560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So, a Columbia sociology professor, Debbie Bescher, she knows what's going on here. What was going on at Columbia before NYPD came and told Model Hamas it's time to vacate to Hamilton Hall.
So you call it Model Hamas, I call it glamping for Palestine, because there's still 4 dozen plus universities that have glamping sites.
Oh, there's more than that. I mean, they're all over the Western world at this point. You know, it's copycatism. We want to be, we see who can out-temper tantrum who.
Yeah.
A Columbia sociology professor, Debbie Bescher, gets it, though. She gets it. What's really going on here is a well-orchestrated conspiracy by MAGA Republicans. This is a deep thinker, sociology professor at the Ivy League. So let me turn the floor over to her, please.
Administration has been making choices for months to go along with the demands of the MAGA Republicans and the right to ruin our universities, to turn our universities into a police state and to repress our students' speech. And they're just following that playbook.
So you think some of this is political?
I think a lot of it is political. This all started after the congressional hearing a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so there it is, spelled out. Now you know. This is what you see on college campuses from these pro-Islamist terrorist cosplayers is not George Soros. It's not the well-established and well-funded Students for Justice in Palestine groups and the other professional agitators on campus that have been there for generations, dating back to the inception of the boycott, divest, the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction movement that started. And I remember very well when I was at Northwestern 30 years ago. No. Acceding to the demands of MAGA Republicans to destroy universities and repress the free expression of the students on campus, which started a couple of months ago when a few Ivy League university presidents were whistled before a congressional committee to ask whether or not they think that the promotion of the genocide of the Jews is something that comports with their standards. Sociology professor, Columbia. That's who you're dealing with. Why are we funding them?
No.
Picking up on the conversation that we had with Steve Moore, that statements that President Trump made via video last week. It's such a curious thing. Republicans have a real difficult time turning off the spigot of other people's money to not just their political enemies, but America's philosophical enemies. It's the most curious thing. So let's explore that, among other topics, a little bit with our friend Bryan Steil. He, of course, is a Republican congressman from Wisconsin, representing Wisconsin's first, Kenosha area, just north of the Cheddar Curtain there. And he joins us now. Bryan Steil, thanks for joining us, as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
I know the House Republicans announced they're going to do a look-see into federal funding of colleges and so on and so forth. I mean, what is there to see? Shouldn't we have a hand with the kinds of money that's spent and the kind of endowments that particularly these elite universities have? It doesn't seem like there's much investigation that's required. What's required is a proposal and some political capital be spent in advance of a proposal to do something about it.
You're absolutely right as to how unserious some of our nation's universities have become, and they continue to allow these types of protests to go on rather than actually enforcing the law and making sure that every student knows they have a right to be safe on campus. What we have seen House Republicans do is, in particular, after some of the nation's elite universities go after the endowment side of these universities that continue to fund some of the challenges that we see. The biggest battle we have right now is President Biden is trying to go around congressional authority and simply complete the spigot turn on by canceling out student loans, which we know is simply transferring that debt to every American. And so at the end of the day, the battle we have in the short term is preventing President Biden from trying to use unconstitutional power to actually cancel the student debt. And then we're going to have to dig in further, as you correctly note, as it relates to the funds that are going to these universities. The endowments are first on the list.
Yeah, I mean, I know the power of the purse is tenuous because the majority is tenuous in the House, and where everything is an eye towards November. But this is one of those things where you do what you can now, and you start to draw some lines so that you man those lines and defend those lines. If you have both congressional majorities and a Republican named Trump in the White House come January, I mean, this is something that there has to be teeth behind. The reinstatement of student loans. I'm open-minded on the approach, whether it's taxing the endowments or just rescinding the federal funds, getting the federal government out of the student loan business altogether, putting it back in private hands. I mean, there just needs to be a pretty significant restructuring of the way that the federal government intervenes to underwrite these incubators of anti-Americanism.
Well, in everything the government comes in and subsidizes, whether or not it's education or healthcare, it grows, it becomes more expensive, it becomes unwieldy, and it doesn't serve the purpose for which it was created. And so what we need to be doing is coming back to core conservative principles, which is getting the government out of the way. And so as we do that and we look at what's occurring on our college campuses, I think it's an absolutely appropriate conversation to be having.
Well, and right now, as we speak, they're tearing down the encampments at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And do you think they took too long in doing this?
Well, in the real-time observation, it looks like you're exactly right, that they're finally taking down the encampment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's a good move. Now, this is where it's important just to enforce the law from day one. And so what we've seen is universities across the country refuse to enforce the rule of law. That degrades public safety. And the key here is that university presidents, just like governors or other elected leaders across the country, should be enforcing the rule of law on day one and preventing this illegal behavior from occurring in the first place. It's a lesson I think some of them are learning from what is taking place at Columbia, and others have yet to learn that lesson.
So Bill Malugin, Fox News, has some new data on Biden's parole program, particularly the CHNV program, which is Cuba, Honduras, Nicaragua, Venezuelan migrants being flown into this country. DHS data that shows during an 8-month stretch from January through August of last year, 200,000 migrants were flown into the United States via this program. 80% of them arriving in Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, Tampa. But he has a list of the distribution of the 200,000 across 15 cities, including Chicago, which was only 500 as compared to, say, well, as you said, 80% of them, 161,000, the state of Florida. So with respect to this illustration of the lawlessness at the border and the sort of all of the open borders policy, in addition to impeaching Mayorkas, what, if anything, can House Republicans do between now and November? Or is this all just documenting, making the arguments, and then presenting the choice in November?
I mean, this is an all-of-the-above approach to try to stop what President Biden's doing. But our efforts to try to stop this in the courts have continually come up short. The public pressure to get Biden to change course has continued to come up short. The inability of us leveraging some of these spending bills, so again, the one that I voted against and others, to be able to get border security has not shown up. And then at the end of the day, this is going to be the importance of electing President Trump. People are going to have a choice, in particular in key states like my home state of Wisconsin. If you want to have continued open borders, it's a vote for President Biden and the Democrats. Yep. And if you want to actually get serious about securing the border, we're going to have to change the White House and reelect President Trump. It's pretty clear that that's the only path that's in front of us to secure this border at this point.
Well, tell us about Trump's visit today in Wisconsin.
Yeah, very exciting. President Trump is going to be at the Waukesha Airport this afternoon in Wisconsin. And it's going to be a great contrast about where we are today as a country and where we were under President Trump. It's great that he's coming to the state. This is frustratingly his only day off of the week because of the trial that continues to take place by the Democratic DA of New York. But him coming to Milwaukee, him coming to Waukesha, talking directly to voters and contrasting in particular his policies on the border to President Biden's open border policies, the more we're doing that, the more likely we're going to be to win in November.
I wanted to play this clip of an exchange between Matt Gaetz and Secretary of Defense General Lloyd Austin over U.S. presence in Gaza. We're building and manning this pier. Our troops are. And the possibility that American soldiers get pulled into armed conflict in the Middle East. This exchange, take a listen.
Ms. Slotkin just said there'll be about 1,000 U.S. service members operating a pier system off of Gaza. How many of them will have guns, Mr. Secretary?
Well, typically all of the deployed service members carry guns, and they have the ability to protect themselves if challenged.
So if someone from land in Gaza shoots at our service members who are on the $320 million pier that we're building, you're telling me our service members can shoot back?
They have the right to return fire to protect themselves. Now,
well, do we think that's so? Now I want to move to the likelihood that you think someone from land in Gaza might shoot at our service members on this pier. Do you think that's a likely scenario?
That's possible. Yes.
This is a very telling moment, Mr. Secretary, because you've said something that's quite possible that could happen, right? Shots from Gaza on our service members, and then the response, our armed service members shooting live fire into Gaza. That is a possible outcome here so that we can become the Port Authority and run this pier. Right?
That's correct. I expect that we will always have the ability to protect ourselves. Don't you think that counts as
boots on the ground? President Biden told the country that we weren't going to have boots on the ground in Gaza.
And we won't.
Okay, but you guys parse the distinction between, like when Americans think boots on the ground, they think Americans in harm's way or engaged actively in a conflict. You guys seem to be sort of saying that boots on a pier connected to the ground, connected to service members shooting into Gaza, doesn't count as boots on the ground?
It does not.
I think you're going to find the American people have a different perspective on that. And if we're going to have people shooting into Gaza, we probably should have a vote on that, pursuant to our war powers.
Gaetz isn't always good, but sometimes he is. I think that was a moment that he appropriately raises and says, so if we're going to have American soldiers in harm's way, then we should probably talk about it and maybe have a vote under the War Powers Act. Is that a fair point that Gaetz raises with respect to Austin?
Well, I think in particular he raises how ridiculous the Biden administration is for this attempt at engagement in Gaza. It's obviously an area that's hostile to the United States, and putting our service members literally on a pier connected to land, as Matt Gaetz correctly notes there, it doesn't seem like the right move. And the president doing this should really come to Congress and confirm that this is what the American people want, because I don't think at the end of the day this is what the American people want. The president putting our service members in such a precarious situation, 1,000 men and women who've signed up to serve the United States to protect our interests, putting them in harm's way in this manner is not appropriate. And I think the president should be held accountable for this type of an action.
So where is the House Republican caucus on this after the fight over the foreign aid package that Speaker Johnson led? I mean, are we going to hear something akin to what Gaetz just said from Speaker Johnson on this topic? Are we going to be beset by? I know Massey and MTG are supposed to have a press conference today about moving to unseat Speaker Johnson. So where does the committee and the caucus stand now, so that we, again, at minimum, hear arguments and taking positions and forcing the issue coming from the House Republican caucus?
Well, I think what you see a couple of things playing out. So you have Speaker Johnson in an incredibly difficult job, I think doing an admirable job under incredibly difficult circumstances. Then you have the question of what can we get done here to the end. I think one of the biggest roles that we're going to have is conducting oversight over this administration in every aspect of the administration. And so you correctly noted earlier about the oversight that we need to have in the Department of Education. We need to make sure we're having that at the Department of Defense on their actions that are occurring in Gaza. We need to have that in the Securities and Exchange Commission, where they continue to run roughshod on rulemaking. And so this is going to be bird dogging this administration now until the end when we elect President Trump in November.
Representative Bryan Steil, Republican from Wisconsin's 1st Congressional, Kenosha area. Representative Steil, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
This is Seth Leibson for townhall.com. The dignity of the human, individual rights like freedom of speech and religion, women's equality, reliable standards of right and wrong, openness to other cultures and their ideas, these were the markers of Western civilization. But the Marxists of the 70s and 80s saw an opening for their revolution and foisted race onto the notion of the West. White, everywhere, stood for oppression. The chants of hey, hey, ho, ho, Western civ has got to go in the 1980s were a success. Adults did themselves no favors when they dismissed college students' odd ideologies, the defense of violence, euphemized with words like liberation, struggle, and social justice. We are witnessing a culmination